The fluorescent lights hummed their tired song above the empty community center. The last folding chair had been stacked against the cinder block wall, and the faint smell of floor wax still lingered in the air like a memory no one had bothered to sweep away. Outside, car doors were closing, engines turning over, the world moving on to dinner reservations and bedtime routines. Inside, only two people remained. Sophia Langford stood near the exit, her tailored charcoal blazer still perfectly buttoned, the thin gold watch on her wrist catching the overhead light each time she checked the time she no longer needed to keep. The speech had ended 20 minutes ago. She had smiled for the photographs, shaken every offered hand, and listened to the usual compliments about how inspiring it was to see someone who made it giving back. Her foundation's banner had already been rolled up and carried out by a volunteer who kept calling her ma'am. But one person had not moved. In the farthest row, almost swallowed by shadow, a 13-year-old boy sat with a worn black backpack clutched between his knees. His hoodie was faded at the elbows. His sneakers had been wiped clean that morning but still carried the scuffs of too many sidewalks. He had not raised his hand during the question and answer portion. He had not joined the line of people waiting for a handshake or a selfie. He had simply watched her from his seat, eyes steady, face unreadable, the way someone watches a storm they already know will pass without touching them. Sophia's assistant hovered by the door, tablet in hand, waiting. Sophia looked at the boy once more, then crossed the polished floor. Her heels clicked softly until the sound stopped beside his row. She paused, then stepped in and lowered herself into the chair directly to his left, leaving no polite buffer between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The boy's voice, when it finally came, was flat. Not rude, not dramatic, just practiced, like he had said the words so many times they no longer required any feeling at all. I've been in 10 different homes. Sophia did not flinch. She did not say, "I'm sorry," or reach for the comforting phrases adults usually offered children like him. She simply exhaled, a slow, heavy sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs, and let her gaze drop to the scuffed floor between her shoes. "I made it to 11, she answered. The boy's head lifted, not all the way, just enough for the light to catch the flicker of surprise that crossed his face before he looked away again, as if even hope had become something he no longer trusted himself to hold for long. In that quiet community center, with the rest of the city moving on outside, something shifted. The woman whose name was on buildings and whose foundation spent millions helping children exactly like this one had chosen to sit in the dark with the only person who had not asked for her attention. And the boy who had spent his life learning how to disappear in plain sight had just been seen. What if the people we applaud for their strength are often the ones who had to become strong because no one ever stayed long enough to protect them? If this opening moment stayed with you, if it made you feel something quiet and real, I want you to know I spent a lot of time shaping this story with care, so it would honor both the pain and the possibility these two people carry. If you'd like to walk through the rest of it with me, subscribing helps more than you might realize. It tells me these stories matter to someone else too. Thank you for being here." Sophia Langford drove through the quiet streets long after the community center had emptied. The boy's words sat with her in the passenger seat, like a passenger she hadn't invited but couldn't ask to leave. "I've been in 10 different homes." She had answered him without hesitation, the number slipping out of her mouth before she could dress it in the careful language she used on stage. Now, with only the low hum of the engine and the occasional flash of streetlights across her dashboard, she felt the old weight return, the one she had spent decades learning how to carry without letting it show. Most people who met Sophia saw the version the world had decided to celebrate. The tech founder who had built something lasting from nothing, the woman whose foundation quietly moved millions toward children who, like her, had been moved too many times. They saw the polished speeches, the steady presence, the kind of success that looked like it had always been inevitable. What they never saw was the girl who had learned before she turned 9 that the only thing you could truly count on was the moment you were told to pack your things again. Her mother had died when Sophia was 8. After that, the state became the only parent she had. The first move came quickly, a small house with a couple who meant well but already had 3 children of their own. The second move came 6 months later when the husband lost his job. By the third home, Sophia had stopped asking why. By the 5th, she had stopped learning the names of the other children. She kept her few belongings in a single plastic bag at the foot of whatever bed she was given, never bothering to unfold the clothes or place anything on the nightstand. Unpacking felt like a promise she had no right to make. Home number 7 was different, though she didn't know it would be at the time. It was a brick group home on the edge of the city, the kind of place that smelled like institutional soup and old radiators. A single mother named Miss Ellison volunteered there every Tuesday. She didn't have much, a small apartment nearby, a car that needed new brakes, and hands that were always busy with someone else's children. But she noticed Sophia. Not the way caseworkers noticed, checking boxes on a form. She noticed the way a person notices another person. One Tuesday, Miss Ellison brought a second-hand couch cushion and placed it in the corner of the common room. "This one's yours if you want it," she said simply. For 3 months, that cushion stayed in the same spot. No one else sat there, no one moved it, and every Tuesday, Miss Ellison would ask Sophia one question about her day and actually wait for the answer. She never tried to fix her. She never looked at her like she was a problem that needed solving. She simply stayed. Sophia still kept the photograph from that time in her purse, a young black girl with tired eyes and neat braids standing in front of the brick building, her hands clasped in front of her like she was already practicing how to hold herself together. She had taken it out tonight and placed it in Malik's hands without thinking. Now, driving home, she wondered if the boy had felt the same small shock she had felt at 8, the shock of being seen without having to perform for it. When she aged out at 18, Sophia carried that same plastic bag approach into adulthood. She worked nights at a diner and days at a community college. She learned to code in the quiet hours between shifts because it was the only skill she could practice without needing anyone else's permission. The company she eventually built grew because she understood something most of her competitors never had to learn. People will give everything they have to the first place that feels like it might not disappear overnight. She sold the company years later, but the foundation that carried her name was never about charity in the way most people use the word. It was about building the kind of safety she had never been given, roofs that stayed roofs and people who stayed people. She had a daughter now. Maya was 16, and lately the distance between them had begun to feel familiar in a way that scared Sophia more than any boardroom ever had. Maya still lived in the same house, still ate at the same table, but she had started closing her bedroom door earlier each evening. Her answers had grown shorter. Her eyes carried the same guarded look Sophia had once practiced in bathroom mirrors. Sophia told herself it was normal teenage behavior. She told herself that providing everything she had never had should have been enough. But some nights, when the house grew quiet, she wondered if she had made the same mistake the system had with her, giving a child safety without ever giving her the certainty that she was the reason someone chose to stay. Tonight, after sitting with Malik in that empty community center, Sophia found herself standing in Maya's doorway long after her daughter had fallen asleep. She didn't turn on the light. She simply stood there, looking at the outline of her child beneath the blanket, and felt the old question rise again, the one she had carried since home number 3. Will anyone ever see me and choose to stay? She had built an empire so other children wouldn't have to ask it. She had not yet figured out how to keep her own daughter from asking it too. While Sophia Langford stood in the quiet doorway of her daughter's bedroom, another life was unfolding across the city, in a small rented house on a street where the streetlights flickered more often than they stayed lit. Malik Thompson moved through his evening routine the way he always did, without sound, without drawing attention, without leaving any trace that he had been there. The Harris house was not the worst place he had lived. Denise Harris tried. She made sure there was food on the table and that Malik's school paperwork stayed organized in a folder she kept on top of the refrigerator. Robert Harris was quieter, the kind of man who came home tired and spoke mostly in short nods. They had 2 younger children of their own, a 6-year-old girl who still asked Malik to play sometimes, and a 9-year-old boy who had learned to copy his older foster brother's careful silence. The house itself was modest but clean. What it lacked was the feeling that anyone inside it believed this arrangement would last. Malik's room was the smallest. It had once been a storage space before someone added a narrow window and called it a bedroom. The walls were painted a faded blue that had chipped near the baseboard. There was a bed, a second-hand desk with one drawer that stuck, and a closet that held only what he could carry. On the floor beside the door sat his backpack. It was always there, always zipped, always ready. Inside it were 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a small notebook, and the one thing he never left behind, a faded photograph of himself at 6 years old, standing next to a woman whose face had begun to blur in his memory. He did not know if she was his mother or an aunt or someone who had simply been kind for a little while. He only knew that if he ever had to leave in the middle of the night, the photograph would come with him. He had been in this home for 11 months. That was the longest he had stayed anywhere since he was 7. 11 months was long enough to learn the sound of the floorboards that creaked when Robert came home late, long enough to know that Denise hummed when she was worried, long enough to understand that when the agency called, the conversations in the kitchen grew quieter and the answers grew shorter. Tonight, the voices in the kitchen were low again. Malik sat on the edge of his bed, backpack already packed for the community center event his caseworker had insisted he attend. "It's part of that new program with the foundation," the woman had said over the phone 2 days earlier. "Sophia Langford is speaking. Could be good for you to hear someone who made it out." Malik had not argued. He had learned long ago that arguing only made adults remember you were there. From the kitchen, he heard Robert's tired voice. "I'm telling you, Denise, the hours got cut again. We can barely cover the groceries and the light bill. If they send another kid—" "We're not saying no to everyone," Denise answered, her voice softer but strained. "Just maybe not right now. Malik's been good. He doesn't cause trouble, but we have to be realistic." Malik did not move. He had trained himself not to. The words were not new. He had heard variations of them in 9 other houses. The only difference was how long it took for the adults to say them out loud. He stood, picked up the backpack, and walked to the door. The photograph inside pressed against his spine through the fabric. He had not unpacked anything when he arrived here 11 months ago. He never did. Unpacking was for children who believed the bed would still be theirs in 6 months. Malik had stopped being that child a long time ago. Outside, the night air was cool. He walked the 6 blocks to the bus stop without looking back at the house. The community center was on the other side of the city, in a neighborhood where the buildings stood straighter and the lights stayed on. He rode the bus in silence, watching his reflection in the dark window, already preparing the face he would wear when he walked into the room where a woman named Sophia Langford would talk about grit like it was something you could buy if you worked hard enough. He did not know that the woman on the stage had once carried her own belongings in a plastic bag. He did not know she had once sat in rooms exactly like the one he was heading toward, counting the exits. He only knew that rich people who gave speeches rarely understood what it felt like to live in a world where every door had a lock on the outside, and every "this time might be different" eventually turned into another set of packed bags by the door. When he arrived, the community center was already filling with people who looked like they belonged there. Malik found a seat in the very last row, placed his backpack between his knees, and waited for the woman who would soon change everything without ever raising her voice. The morning of the community center event, the Harris kitchen smelled like burnt toast and quiet worry. Denise stood at the sink with her back to the room, shoulders tight beneath her faded cardigan. Robert sat at the table scrolling through his phone, the screen lighting the lines around his eyes that had deepened in the last few weeks. Malik moved through the space like a shadow, pouring cereal he didn't really want into a bowl and eating without tasting it. He had heard enough the night before. The agency had called again. Another child needed a temporary bed, and the Harrises were being asked if they could take one more. Robert's answer had been short. Denise's had been careful. Neither of them had said Malik's name, but he had felt it hanging in the air between them like smoke that never quite cleared. When Denise finally turned around, her smile was the kind adults used when they were trying not to lie. "You should get going soon if you want to make that talk. Your caseworker said it was important." Malik nodded. He rinsed his bowl, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet exactly where he had found it. Then he picked up the backpack that had never left its spot by the door and walked out into the cool morning without saying goodbye. At the community center, the room was warmer and louder than he expected. People in nice clothes stood in clusters, laughing easily. A large banner behind the small stage read, "Building Futures That Last." Malik found a seat in the farthest row, set his backpack between his knees, and waited. Sophia Langford spoke for 23 minutes. Her voice was steady and clear. She talked about resilience and second chances and the kind of grit that could be learned. Malik listened without moving. He had heard versions of this speech before, from teachers, from caseworkers, from people who meant well but had never once had to pack everything they owned into a single bag before breakfast. When the applause faded and people began lining up near the stage, Malik stayed where he was. He watched Sophia shake hands and pose for photographs. He watched her smile, the same smile she had worn on stage. And then, for reasons he could not name, he watched her notice him. She crossed the room slowly. When she reached his row, she sat in the chair beside him without asking. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Malik heard his own voice, flat and practiced, say the words he had said too many times before. "I've been in 10 different homes." Sophia did not flinch. She did not offer the quick sympathy most adults reached for. She simply exhaled and answered, "I made it to 11." Before either of them could say more, her phone vibrated sharply in her blazer pocket. She glanced at the screen, and something in her face changed, a tightening around the eyes, a small pull at the corner of her mouth. She stood. "I have to take this," she said quietly. She glanced at him for one more second, as if she wanted to say something else but didn't yet have the words. Then she pulled a simple white card from her purse and placed it on the chair she had just left. "If you ever need to talk to someone who understands what it feels like to count, my door doesn't close after one visit." She walked away quickly, already speaking into the phone in a low, urgent voice. Malik stared at the card. It had her name and a single phone number printed in clean black letters. He slipped it into the front pocket of his backpack without looking at it again. That night, long after the community center had gone dark, Sophia sat in her car in the underground garage beneath her building. The call from Maya had been short and sharp. Her daughter had been at a friend's house and had no intention of coming home yet. The argument that followed had ended with Maya hanging up. Sophia had driven home in silence, the boy's face still clear in her mind. She opened her laptop and sent a single message to her assistant. "The boy in the back row at the community center event today. Black, 13, backpack between his knees. Find out his name and placement details, quietly." The reply came 20 minutes later. A short file appeared in her inbox. Malik Thompson, age 13. Current placement, Harris family. Previous placements, 10. Case notes indicate high risk of disruption. Recent school incident, defended another student, received warning. Harris family under financial strain. Possible move within 30 days. Sophia read the words twice. Then she opened the small photograph she still carried in her purse, the one of the girl with tired eyes and neat braids standing in front of a brick group home. For the first time in years, she let herself remember what it had felt like to be the child no one wanted to keep. Across the city, Malik sat on the edge of his bed with the backpack unzipped for the 11th time in 11 months. He had not taken anything out. He had only opened it far enough to see the white card resting on top of his folded hoodie. He did not touch it. He simply stared at it until the light in the hallway went off and the house grew quiet in the way that always came before bad news. Neither of them knew yet how close they were to the moment that would change the counting for both of them. The call came the next afternoon. Malik was in his room when he heard Denise's voice change in the kitchen. It dropped into that careful, tired tone adults used when they were about to say something that would hurt. He had heard it 8 times before. He knew what it meant before she even knocked on his door. "Malik," she said from the hallway, not quite looking at him when he opened the door. They found a new placement. It's a group home across the city. They want you there by tomorrow morning. He didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. He had already lived through the part where adults explained that it wasn't personal, that they wished things could be different, that he was a good kid. The words never changed the ending. After Denise left, Malik sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the open backpack. For 11 months he had kept it ready, but never fully packed. Tonight, he finished the job. He folded the last hoodie, placed the photograph on top, and zipped it closed. Then he took Sophia's white card out of the front pocket and stared at it for a long time. He had never called a number like this before. He had never believed anyone who said their door stayed open. But something about the way she had said, "I made it to 11, had lodged itself behind his ribs. It had sounded less like a speech and more like a scar she was willing to show. Across the city, Sophia Langford was learning that some doors only stay open if you force them. Maya had come home at 2:17 a.m. with 2 older girls Sophia had never met. One of them was crying. Maya's eyes were glassy and defiant at the same time. The argument that followed was the worst they had ever had. Maya accused her of caring more about saving strangers than she ever had about her own daughter. Sophia had tried to stay calm, tried to reach for the patient voice she used with foundation staff, but the words that came out were raw. "I'm trying to give you the one thing I never had," she had said. Maya's answer had been quiet and cutting. "Then why does it feel like I'm the one you keep leaving?" Sophia had stood in the hallway long after Maya slammed her bedroom door. The house felt too large and too empty at the same time. At 3:40 a.m., she opened her laptop again and read Malik's file for the 3rd time. The new placement was already in motion, a group home with a reputation for being overcrowded and understaffed, the kind of place that became permanent for too many kids who had already been moved too many times. Her legal counsel had been clear when she called earlier. Direct personal involvement with individual cases could create liability issues for the foundation. They advised her to route everything through proper channels. Sophia had thanked them and hung up. Now she sat in her kitchen with 2 phones in front of her, one for the foundation, one personal. She picked up the personal one and dialed the number for Malik's caseworker. It went to voicemail. She left a message anyway, using the calm, measured tone that had built her company. "This is Sophia Langford. I met Malik Thompson yesterday. I'm requesting an urgent meeting before his transfer tomorrow. This is personal, not foundation business." She hung up and stared at the old photograph on the counter, the one of the girl with tired eyes and neat braids. For the first time, she let herself admit the truth she had been avoiding for years. She had built an entire foundation to make sure children like Malik wouldn't have to keep counting homes. But she had not built the same kind of safety inside her own house. Maya was pulling away exactly the way Sophia had pulled away at 16. Not because she was ungrateful, but because she had learned that the people who were supposed to stay eventually found reasons to leave. Sophia picked up the phone again. This time she called her driver. "Be ready in 20 minutes, she said. "I need to go to the Harris house before sunrise." She did not know if Malik would still be there. She did not know if he would even want to see her. She only knew that for the first time in a long time, she was choosing to show up for someone before the system moved them again, even if it meant risking the careful boundaries she had spent years protecting. On the other side of the city, Malik sat on his bed with Sophia's card in his hand. The house was quiet. Everyone else had gone to sleep. He had already decided he would not go to the group home without trying one last thing. He picked up his phone, the old one the Harrises had given him when he first arrived, and typed the number from the card into a new message. He stared at the blinking cursor for almost 10 minutes. Then he wrote 3 words. "You said your door doesn't close." He hit send before he could delete it. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten.
In less than 6 hours, a caseworker would arrive to take him to another building where no one would know his name and no one would care how many times he had already been moved.
The sky was still dark when Sophia's car pulled up in front of the Harris house. The caseworker wasn't due for another 2 hours. Denise answered the door in her robe, eyes widening when she recognized the woman standing on her porch. "I'm sorry to come so early," Sophia said quietly. "I need to speak with Malik, just for a little while." Denise looked past her to the black car idling at the curb, then back at Sophia's face. Something in the other woman's expression made her step aside without asking questions. Malik was already awake, backpack by the door. When he saw Sophia, he didn't look surprised. He only nodded once, as if he had been waiting for something he couldn't name. They didn't speak much on the short drive. When the car stopped in front of the community center, Malik understood. The building was dark and quiet, the same way it had been 2 nights ago. Sophia led him inside through a side door the night janitor had left unlocked for her. The fluorescent lights hummed the same low song. The chairs were still stacked against the wall. They sat in the same row as before. This time, Sophia didn't leave an empty seat between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper, "You said your door doesn't close." Sophia looked at him, really looked, and let the polished version of herself fall away. "I've been in 11 homes. My mother died when I was 8. After that, the state kept moving me every time I started to learn the names of the other kids. By home 9, I had stopped unpacking. By 11, I had stopped hoping the next one would be different." She reached into her purse and took out the small, creased photograph. She placed it gently in Malik's hands the way she had 2 nights earlier. The girl in the picture had tired eyes and neat braids. She stood in front of a brick group home with her hands clasped in front of her like she was already practicing how to hold herself together. "That was me," Sophia said. "Home number 7. A single mother who volunteered there every Tuesday taught me that being seen didn't require being perfect. She didn't have much, but she had a couch that stayed mine for more than 3 months, and she never once looked at me like I was a problem to be solved." Malik's fingers tightened around the photograph. Sophia turned to face him fully. "I built my company so I could build the kind of safety I never had. I have a daughter, she's 16, and lately she's been pulling away the same way I used to. It made me realize something I had been avoiding for years." She paused, her eyes steady on his. "Money can give you a roof. It can't give you a reason to believe you'll still be there in the morning. I'm not promising you forever tonight, Malik, but I am telling you that my door doesn't close after 1 visit, and if you ever decide you want to stop counting, you won't have to count alone." The tears came fast and hot. Malik had trained himself never to let them fall in front of adults who might use them as proof that he was too much work. But these tears felt different. They felt like an answer to a question he had carried in his chest since home number 3. Will anyone ever see me and choose to stay? Sophia didn't reach for him. She didn't need to. She simply stayed in the chair beside him as the first light of morning began to touch the windows of the empty community center. 2 survivors of the same quiet war, sitting in the fragile, powerful possibility that maybe, this time, the moving had finally stopped. The sun had fully risen by the time Sophia drove Malik back to the Harris house. They didn't speak much on the way. There was nothing that needed to be filled. When they pulled up, the caseworker's car was already in the driveway. Sophia stepped out first. She spoke with the caseworker and Denise on the porch while Malik waited inside. She didn't make grand promises or throw her weight around. She simply explained that she had met Malik at the community center event and wanted to make sure any next steps were made with his stability in mind. She offered to connect the caseworker with resources through her foundation, the proper way, through the right channels, so the Harris family could have breathing room while better options were explored. She made it clear this wasn't about taking over. It was about making sure one more child didn't have to pack his life into a bag before breakfast. By mid-morning, the transfer had been paused. Malik would stay with the Harrises for at least another month while the agency worked on finding a more permanent, supportive placement. It wasn't forever, but it was the first time in a long time that not yet felt like something other than a delay. Sophia went home to a quiet house. Maya was awake, sitting at the kitchen island with her arms wrapped around herself. The anger from the night before had burned down to something smaller and more tired. Sophia made tea she didn't really want and sat across from her daughter. "I met a boy yesterday," she said simply. "He's 13. He's been in 10 homes. When I looked at him, I saw myself at that age, and I realized I've been so busy trying to fix systems that I forgot how much it matters when one person just stays." Maya didn't answer right away, but later that evening she left her bedroom door open. Weeks passed. Malik still kept his backpack by the door, but he had started leaving a few things on the desk in his room: a book from school, a drawing he was working on. He hadn't unpacked everything, but he had stopped treating every day like it might be the last one in that house. Sophia had begun turning her phone off for 2 hours every evening. Maya still pulled away sometimes, but she also started coming into the kitchen when her mother was making dinner, lingering instead of disappearing. The distance hadn't disappeared, but it had stopped growing. One quiet Saturday, Sophia received a short text from an unknown number. Still counting, but slower now. She didn't reply right away. She simply sat with the message, the old photograph resting on the table beside her phone, and let the words settle. In the end, Sophia Langford had not saved Malik Thompson with money or connections or a dramatic rescue. She had done something far smaller and far more powerful. She had sat with him in an empty community center at dawn and shown him her own scars without asking him to show his first. She had proven that sometimes the most important thing a person with power can do is refuse to look away. And Malik, who had spent his entire childhood learning how to leave before he could be left, had finally met someone who chose to stay, not because she had to, but because she understood what it cost to keep moving.